you, everyone. Welcome to the 7th episode of Next in Queue. I'm your host, Rob Dwyer, and with me today, I am joined by Emily Thomas, who's the manager of customer success at the American Forest Foundation. Emily, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, happy to be here and happy to be having a conversation with you.
Yeah, so one of the goals of my podcast was to talk to a variety of people in all kinds of different disciplines within customer experience, customer care, contact center world. And I'm really excited because I know that you're going to bring a very different perspective to the show. And we chatted very briefly at the ICMI Expo. In fact, you and I don't know each other. This is actually the very first time we've talked outside of a little chatting on the computer. And I was really excited just by looking at your background. I was like, oh, this is really different. So we'll have a chance to talk about all of that. But I really want to start off with just like, where are you from? Where are you coming from? I know you're in Canada now, but where are you from?
So I am originally from a very small island off the coast of Maine. So it is down near Bar Harbor. If you're familiar with Acadia National Park and you've ever been there, if you went to the top of Cadillac Mountain and looked due south, you would see the unbridged island that I grew up on.
So how many people approximately live on this small island?
About 75 year round. So a little small. When I went to high school, it was shocking to me that there were kids in my dorm who were in a dorm that had more people than my hometown did.
So I take it, did you go to the mainland to go to high school?
Yeah, I'm from what's called a tuition town in the state of Maine. And what that means is that my town will pay, because we don't have a high school of our own in the town, my town will pay the same amount for me to go wherever I want as it would have been for me to go to the local high school. And so I leveraged that as far as I possibly could and got a lot of financial support from a lot of folks. I wouldn't be where I am today without the support and belief of a whole community of people in what I could do. And I ended up going to boarding school, and that really set the stage for me to be able to go elsewhere on my educational and then eventually career journey as well.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. Yeah, I always think that I came from a small town, and I did. I grew up in a relatively small town of, I don't know, roughly 10,000 in central Kansas. But, I was close to Wichita, which is 300 plus thousand. I can't imagine growing up on an island with only 75 people on the whole island. That's fascinating. So you go to boarding school, and then eventually you go to college, and you ended up getting your master's in island studies. So obviously, growing up on an island, I can see how that might be appealing to you. But tell me about why you decided to go that direction in college.
So I realized early on, my father's a commercial lobsterman. And I realized early on that there was a need for people to be included in decision making that impacted them. And I wanted to find a way to bring that human element into decision making. And so I went and I was always interested in natural resources and how we're using natural resources. I was really interested in how we could help people be successful with what they were doing or in getting the help that they needed. And so that thread of natural resources and helping people really has gone through, I think, everything that I've done in my career in one respect or another. And I got done with my university degree. I got my bachelor's in geography, and I wasn't quite ready to be done with school yet. And I was like, well, it wouldn't hurt to go do a master's degree. So I ended up applying to this program, and I know everybody's always like, really? You just like on a whim decided to, yes, I basically on a whim
Hey,
decided to go to grad school. No regrets. And chose this degree and this school because it studied islands on their own terms, not through the lens of other people making decisions about them, not through the lens of like islands being experiments, but like what are these islands saying, and giving a voice to these communities that traditionally haven't always had a voice at the table in terms of the decisions that are being made and in terms of how they're being treated. And so I focused in particular, and there are a lot of other ways that you can apply island studies. This was just the way that I applied it. I focused particularly on the relationship between fisheries policy and management and island community development in Maine and Newfoundland. So I
right.
didn't go to my hometown, but I went to other islands in Maine and I interviewed fishermen. I interviewed other folks who are involved in economic development in these communities in both Maine and Newfoundland, and was able to see some really neat threads that were the same in both of these places. So for me, it was about how can I help give voice to other people? How can I help these people get what they want? And um, a couple of years ago, I had been working in fisheries and I was ready for something different. And this opportunity came along in the forestry world. And I was like, well, you know what? We'll give it a go. And, I've been doing this for 3 years, and that ended up leading me into this contact center world, which I never intended to be in. And this has been the thing that I think has connected me the most to that original mission of giving people voice and helping people get what they need.
Oh, that's really interesting. Uh, I'm curious if, in talking to these people in these communities, some of whom I have to assume are because you're so focused on the fishing industry, with your father's occupation, I'm wondering, did you learn anything or feel a different kind of connection with him and his work as you went through this process?
I think so, to some degree. We've always, in our house, it was always, dad would come home at the end of the day and, how was fishing today, dad? And there were some days where he would look at me and he'd be like, well, I made it back in. And some days that's all you can say about an end of the day is like, you know
Yeah.
what? We did our best, but like we made it back at the end of the day. This helped with, I think, more visibility on some of the past things that I had heard him talk about. I think I did identify with it a little bit, but since this was such a normal topic of conversation, and fisheries really impacted everything in my life, including like the amount of money that we could get for student loans.
Yeah.
When I was in college, it impacted the schedule of when we can drop things off, when we can go on vacation. So for me, it really had been, I ate, lived, and breathed around a fishing schedule. And so I think there are some families where they may not have had that experience, but for me, it added more perspective. But I don't know that if it was like anything new per se, other than occasionally being able to say, hey, dad, I finally met that person that you've been telling me about for years. And yes, they are fantastic, which was really fun to be able to do and say, like, yes, I know who that person is now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just a really interesting way to um, be exposed in a more in-depth way into things that you've kind of already grown up and seem to be, part of your family story almost, and just getting more perspective on that. You also did some volunteer work with Americorps, right?
I did. I spent 4 months, my first year of grad school, with an Americorps position down in Maine, through the Island Institute, which is a really fantastic nonprofit in Maine. And they helped me get set up with another nonprofit in Maine that focuses on fisheries management. And so my position over that summer was really to do research for them and to help uh, find out more about a problem that they were trying to solve. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity because it helped me to think more critically about the problems that fishermen were trying to solve and how they did outreach around it and which areas had been more successful based on the outreach that they had done. And so that gave me a really good starting point for where I wanted to go in the world.
For the listeners and viewers who aren't familiar with AmeriCorps, can you give us just a very high level overview of what that is?
Oh, I hope that I am going to do this right. So we'll see on that front. AmeriCorps is a really fascinating program in that it takes typically young, but not always. It takes folks and plugs them into local projects that are place based in areas that have need. A lot of them are in rural communities, but also a lot of them I think are also in cities and underserved areas. And so it's about building capacity and adding in capacity where needed across the country. And so it's really based on how we can help the US with development there. It's a really cool program. And I don't know as much about it as people who have done longer placements. Mine was like, I think the shortest one they would allow. But it's a really cool program.
Yeah, I know just enough to know what it is and have some sense of it. And actually, I think you're the first person I've ever talked to that actually participated in it. So I think that's a really interesting organization, and I think they do some really incredible work. So now, well, first of all, there's this transition, and I feel like you were islands and fisheries and islands and fisheries and islands and fisheries. And now all of a sudden, the organization that you work for is focused on forest management. So how did you make that transition? I know you just alluded to this, but that seems like, while it's certainly in the conservation world, it seems like a really big change for you.
It's funny. I had been working in fisheries for a number of years. I'd been studying in fisheries for a number of years, and I was doing work that was still important, but it wasn't making me come to life. And I realized that I wanted something that would help me come to life. So I was looking. The company that I was working for is great. They have great people doing great work, but it wasn't right for me. And so I realized that I needed to do something different. So I started looking and thinking about what it was that I wanted. And I came back again to this idea of I want to do something that helps make the world a better place. I want to do something that helps people. And ideally, it will be in conservation right now. I kind of had this thought to myself, and I still have this thought in the back of my mind of if your goal, really your biggest goal, is to help make the world a better place, there are a lot of ways that you can do that. It can be through the medical system, it can be through the arts. I would argue that the arts are incredibly important. And I would say that for the amount of time that the most of us have spent staying home watching movies over the last, year and a half, 2 years, the arts are probably need a good old shot of funding in them because we wouldn't have survived
Yeah.
without everybody staying home and watching movies and binging TV shows. And there's a lot of different ways that I can help make that story true for myself of make the world a better place and help people. And this happens to be the way that I'm doing it right now. So I was applying for a whole bunch of different things, just like what's going to give me light, like what's going to make me feel like myself, what's going to help me get closer to my goal. And I saw this job and I said, I've got a lot of experience in customer service. I sold boat tickets for the local ferry service for like all of high school and university. I've worked in gift shops. I worked at a library where I was on the front lines talking to people. Forestry, it may be different than fisheries, but at the same time, it still is a renewable natural resource where if you treat it the right way, it can continue indefinitely. I don't actually have the expertise on how to manage a fishery. I might know a lot about a lot of the rules, but I don't actually have the expertise on that. I rely on other people to have that expertise, and I help connect people to the right people. So I saw this job and I was like, customer service and conservation. This would be really cool. And of course, now I have to allude to the really hysterical irony in this job. Where I live now is about an hour away from where the office is for this job that I ended up in. It was a tech startup. Woodscape was a tech startup that was purchased by the American Forest Foundation. And I used to live across the street from their office building. And we moved to where we are now to be closer to my job. And I was like, well, wouldn't that just be ironic if I ended up getting this job across the street from where we used to live when I couldn't find a job in that area to begin with? And, I interviewed for it thinking, oh boy, that's a long commute. That's a really long commute. And then I talked to them and I saw how everybody in the office interacted. And I realized that, yeah, it might be an hour away, but I want to be a part of that. I want that environment. I want that culture. And so it ended up being the right job. It was literally the right timing for it to have come out. If it had come out like 6 months earlier, I wouldn't have been looking at that point in time.
Yeah.
So I would have missed it. And, we're not irony impaired in our house on the commute that we moved so I wouldn't have to commute. And then I took a job that required me to commute again. But it was the right job, and it's the job that does bring that light back for me of I'm helping people, I'm helping to remove problems, I'm helping make sure that people are getting help on their terms. I'm not forcing them to do something that they don't want to do. I'm not selling somebody on something that they don't want to do. We
Yeah.
use tactics from sales, but I flat out tell landowners on a regular basis, I'm not going to be offended if you tell me this isn't for you. You're allowed to change your mind at any point, basically until you sign a contract, and then, well, that's a whole different kettle of fish. But this is about what you want and what you need, and my job is to make you successful. And if I've made you successful, even if it's not with my program, that's a win in my book. And being able to do that and to help other people do that and to bring that work in that culture of this is about what you want as my customer, not what I want for you to want,
Hmm.
was exactly what I wanted. And so this has been like such a joyful journey for me of being able to do that and ending up in this world. So like I thought I was going to end up in islands and fisheries, didn't. But you know what? The best things in life happen when you pivot and you go, you know what?
Yeah.
I thought that was what I was going to do, but I'm going to be flexible and go try something else.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. You say something that I think will resonate with a lot of people that are in this business, which is I didn't expect to be here, right? I didn't think I was going to end up in a
Mhm.
in a contact center. I hear this all the time, and it's true for me as well. And yet we find people that stick around. They stick around because they love it for some reason, right? Maybe it's about the helping people part that you talk about a lot. For some people, I think it's an interesting challenge to solve, right?
Mhm.
One of my guests that I talked to, he was and still is very focused on the workforce management part, and he just finds the challenge of solving that over and over and over really interesting. And I think for some people, and you mentioned this a little bit as well, or alluded to it, I think for some people, the technology itself is really interesting and is a piece that people don't think about contact centers as using bleeding edge technology, but they do.
Super do in really cool and fascinating ways. Like
Yeah, absolutely.
there are so many things that I've learned both about conservation and about contact centers in doing this work. And one of the things that I realized like recently I had this moment of, oh man, there's so much left to learn. And I realized that I got really excited about that because every time I learn something, I learn how much more I don't know.
Right.
And that's really exciting to not know things because that means there's still more to learn. And if I ever get to a point where I feel like I've learned everything, please put me out to pasture
Yeah.
because I just want to keep learning and keep collecting little bits of knowledge and solving problems as I go.
Yeah, there's just so much to gather, whether it's on the, just the customer side, right? How we interact with people and how we can continually make that better. But from a technology perspective, like you and I know, but I think everyone listening to this understands that the technology just continues to move forward and we do cool new things, and there are people playing with all of these different technologies and thinking about how we can solve interesting problems using these technologies, and that is just not going to stop. It's going to keep
Mm-mm.
going, and sometimes, okay, this maybe doesn't work the way it was intended, but maybe it solves some other problem, right? You see
Mhm.
this in medicine a lot, right? I'm working on this for this particular purpose, and it turns out it doesn't work for that, but hey, that's how we got penicillin, right? I mean,
Mhm.
happy accidents. Stick around for more of my conversation with Emily Thomas right after this. Solving interesting problems with technology. That's what Happy 2 does. At Happy 2, we take decades of experience in technology and customer experience and put them together to solve interesting problems for your business. To find out more, check us out at happy2.com or give us a call at 833 HAPPITU. 833 Happy 2. Now, let's get back to my conversation with Emily Thomas. Now, your management role today, manager of customer success, that's relatively new for you, is it not?
It is relatively new. So I started out on the front line myself and I filled the gap of a call agent. So when we talk about a contact center in my world, I will name my contact center is teeny, teeny, tiny compared to some other folks you may speak with. I work with 4 part-time agents. They are fantastic, but it's teeny tiny. I remember sitting in the ICMI conference and other people being like, "Oh, I work at a contact center with 1,000 agents," and I'm like, the capacity, that would be glorious. Can I have that? Oh,
Yeah.
tiny, tiny amount. We take tactics from sales and we use them for conservation good, essentially. So I
Hmm.
have this teeny tiny team that I work with. I started out being a call agent myself, and I did that for about 6 months for our projects in Wisconsin. So I was running those processes myself. I was talking to landowners myself. I was making all of the mistakes that somebody could make myself. I have frequently told my agents, there's not a mistake that you can make that I haven't made. I have made every single mistake in the book, and I continue to make mistakes because I'm continuing to try new things. It's okay to be wrong, it's okay
Yeah.
to fail. And shortly after I started, even when I didn't have manager in my job title, I still was working with hiring and training our agents. And then last year we, kind of formalized that and I started taking over a little bit more of the management of our team of agents and working with them. So we're figuring out a lot of things as we go. That is one of the beauties of being in that agile startup environment, is that
Hmm.
we can change and try and pivot really quickly. And it's a learning curve. It is
Yeah.
definitely a learning curve, learning how to work with other people. And gonna keep making mistakes, but it means I'm trying things.
Yeah. I think there's a huge value, and this is certainly something that we see a lot in our industry. And it doesn't matter, right, if it's a contact center with thousands of seats or one with 4 or 5 seats like yours. What I see is that the leadership often starts out doing the frontline work, the agent work, the talking to uh, the customer. And I use the term customer
Mhm.
relatively loosely because the customer can be a variety of different people depending on your business. But there's so much value when you're leading people to them trusting you because you've done it. Like I've yep, I've done that. And when it comes to, right, if you are trying to maybe give some advice on how to handle a situation, if you've been there before, it makes it so much easier when you can say, well, when I've run into this situation in the past, this is what works for me.
Yeah, or knowing who to ask or who to talk to help fill that gap if you don't have that gap filled yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, with the small contact center, I absolutely agree. One of the things that you mentioned is this idea of being able to pivot and being able to try new things and being agile. That is really difficult for large contact center operations. The technology cost alone, if I'm going to employ a new technology, is often like it's a big commitment. I can't just like dip my toes in it for a few months and go, okay, yeah, this works for us, or it doesn't work for us. And I feel like there's a lot of ability for companies or organizations of your size to be able to try out new stuff without necessarily feeling like, oh, I'm stuck with this now. Have you had any experience in different stuff that you've played with that you're like, this is great, or not so much, this doesn't work for us?
We are constantly realizing that something doesn't work. And that's, I think, just the nature of operating anything is constantly realizing, like, oh, we thought that was going to work. That did not work the way we thought it was going to. Thankfully for us, it's typically not as much about the technology systems as it is about and adding a new technology system as it is about the technology systems that we already have working together or not working together, as potentially the case may be, and then getting the capacity to help make those changes, because we are a software development company at its heart.
Yeah.
And so most of what I focus on is, okay, what can I do outside of those systems to help alleviate the problem, to help make things better, to help figure out another creative way around this. And so that for me is where most of my like, ooh, that didn't work the way I thought it was going to comes from. Whether it's we're going to try emailing people instead of calling them, which the first time I tried it, I was like, oh yeah, that was an interesting experiment. Like we were able to maintain like the same conversion rate. We were still connecting with the same amount of people and we didn't have to exert as much effort. But then we were like, oh wait, we could probably fix this and make it even better. And so we continued to iterate on that process until we are where we are now. So we're actually having our agents in certain areas do both outbound phone calls and outbound emails to landowners. Lower effort, lower touch, not as dependent on getting somebody to pick the phone up as we were before. And we're, figuring that one out as we go. I mean, you can always improve a process no matter what you do.
Absolutely. I think too, as a smaller organization, and this just kind of fits within that theme of being agile, but it's also about being empowered to try new things, which I also feel like larger organizations sometimes struggle with, particularly on the front lines. There's a hesitancy to go outside of guideline or to try something different because, right, this is just our process and this is what we do. But with smaller organizations, you can absolutely play with that a lot and try and refine and figure out what works and what doesn't work.
I have said multiple times that, and like anytime I make this reference, people usually laugh at me, which I'm all right with. I say, we have guidelines for how we operate. The guidelines are guidelines. They are like the Pirates Code in the Pirates of the Caribbean. They're guidelines, not a strict rule set. It's not, you don't need to follow it to the T there are times when you can shift an intention or something along those lines, as long as we're following the intention behind it on making things easier. And are there times when you do have to stick to a set protocol? Absolutely.
Sure.
Depending on what your role is, what you're doing, how all of those things operate. In my seat, I am the person who's like, okay, so I made these rules and now I'm going to break them because I need to do something different. I'm going to figure out another way to do this because we have to hit our goal or something along those lines. And as long as it's going towards that North Star of, are we making this process better for somebody? Are we improving their experience? Are we serving them better? Then I have a lot of freedom to say, okay, we're going to change how we're doing this so that we can do XYZ a little bit better.
Yeah, it's exciting. Because you operate in a nonprofit world, are there things that you look at and think, this is easier because I am at a nonprofit, or this is more challenging because we're in a nonprofit environment?
Probably. I think of that similar to, you said with the large contact centers. It's like
Yeah.
steering a Navy ship versus a little speedboat.
Yeah.
And I think that there are times when, whether it's a large nonprofit or a small nonprofit, you're in a big, like, top heavy Navy ship. And,
Yeah.
you got to really try hard to course correct. And then you try and call out the obstacle that you have, and the obstacle says, hey, I'm a lighthouse. You need to change course. Versus like the speedboat that's like, okay, we'll just
Right.
go along over here. Whoop. So whether this is something that's very, I think, a common thread for me, whether it's a nonprofit or not, sometimes, depending on the organization, depending on how big it is, you can have those same problems, whether it's a big one or a small
Yeah.
one. And it's about putting decisions in the hands of the people who have the information. I know that there's a really neat leadership mentality that I really appreciate, and the one that I'm trying to build into how I work, of how can I make sure that I'm getting the information into the hands of people who need it so that they can make a decision themselves. And if I can't do that, what are the conditions that I can set so that can be the case? And that's whether it's a big one or a small one,
Mm.
making that same type of um mentality go through, because really I don't like being the person who says you have to do XYZ. And if that's the scenario, it's what other avenues can I pursue so that we can make that not be the case. And that's, my goal when I work with people, is to empower them to be able to do what they need to do. And that whether I was in a for-profit organization or a nonprofit organization, I would be trying to do that same thing.
Yeah.
Getting information into the hands of people who need it so that they can make a decision. I certainly can't make every decision. Nobody wants me to do that anyway.
Well, and right. I mean, when it comes to the people that you're working with, right, the public that you're working with, and obviously you can't make decisions for them, right? You can only help them have information that they need to make an informed decision. So I think that's
Mhm,
important. But I absolutely agree, and it seems like a theme we're talking about, right? Size makes a big difference in how an
mhm,
organization, often how an organization operates. I came from originally, when I got into this business, I worked for a large multinational. It's now called Concentrix because they got bought out, but it was Convergys at the time. But yeah, I mean, that was this huge organization, right? And so the way things are done and that ability to pivot is, it's the Navy cruiser, right? It's a large boat to turn around. And when I left there, I went to a small family-owned contact center, and definitely the ability to pivot, the ability to do things differently was so different. And now within that organization, right, we have this software product, and we operate as like a little startup within a larger organization, and it's magnified even more how much we can just all of a sudden one day we'll all get together and go, oh yeah, we need to totally change this, right? And it's just like it's that snap of the fingers,
Mhm.
somebody makes a decision, and we change direction. And I think that is absolutely an advantage and an exciting thing when you're working within an organization. I can see that sparkle in your eyes sometimes when you're talking about it. Like there's an empowerment to being able to handle things, and affect change, I think is the biggest thing, to really affect change.
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason why, of course, the Navy ship example came to me is, the old joke about the US Navy trying to get a lighthouse to change course, but also the book Turn the Ship Around, which I haven't read, but I've seen talks by the guy who wrote it and stuff like that. And he was a Navy, I think, submarine commander. And he realized that like there was so much bureaucracy that his ship wasn't performing well. They weren't able to do their job. So he basically set guidelines of like, is this going to kill all of this? If it isn't, just do what you got to do. And so I kind of think to myself, if the US Navy can take this approach of like do what you got to do, you don't need to run everything by me. Put the decision making in the hands of the person who has the information. Why can't everyone do that? Whether that's a larger organization, a smaller organization, and how can we help make sure that that's the case in every organization that we're in. And if it isn't the case, what needs to change to make that be the case so that we can put that decision making in the hands of the person who needs to be making the decision? I haven't figured out how to do it yet, but I'm working on it slowly but
Yeah.
surely.
I think one of the things that is most important to implement, that or inject that into your organization. And it's a phrase that you used earlier, and that is for everyone to understand and be on the same page about what that North Star is. Like
Hmm.
what's our purpose? What's the reason that we do the work that we do, whatever that work is? And it could be, right, I'm answering phone calls for an internet retailer, or I could be involved in forest management. The reason for being, as long as we understand that and our decision making is towards that with that in mind, I think we can often empower people to make good decisions. I think the challenge is, and this certainly holds true the larger your organization is, getting everybody on the same page and having that understanding of why we do what it is that we do. If your team is, I can count them on one or two hands, it's much easier than if I got to break out the abacus to count everybody. Makes a
Yeah.
huge difference.
It does make a huge difference, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. It means that you have to find a new way to communicate. And yeah, is it harder to get multiple people on the same page when you have more people? Absolutely. But that means that the stakes are even higher on being more intentional with your communication so that you can help everybody get on the same page and being crystal clear not only about what you're saying, but making sure that people are actually hearing what you're saying. I
Yeah.
remember, I don't know where this came from, unfortunately, otherwise I would give them credit. My job as somebody who's on the phone is to make sure that the other person is hearing what I am saying. My job isn't just to tell them, it's to make sure that they are hearing and interpreting correctly what it is that I am saying. And that rings true whether it's me talking to a customer or me talking to my coworker. I have to
Yeah.
make sure that they are actually hearing and interpreting what it is that I am saying in the way that I intend for them to interpret it. Because if you're saying something and you're saying what you want to say, but they're interpreting it differently, there's a problem there. And you have to take that moment to step back and go, oop, maybe we need to try this again. And I think there are a lot of people in this world who are not willing to take that time to go, "Ooh, hang on, let's think this through a little bit," and then go
Yeah.
back at it again with those fresh eyes.
Yeah, I can think of a lot of times, and I'm sure most of us can, where we've communicated with someone and uh, the message that we intended to convey was not the message that was received.
Mhm.
Sometimes that leads to some unpleasant things, and then we have to go back. No, 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 it's not what I meant. But being intentional, as you say, that's really important in how we communicate, whether it's with customers, whether it's with our peers, so that that message is coming across as we intend, and choosing the right words and choosing the right moment, choosing the right tone and demeanor to deliver
Mhm.
that message makes a huge difference, because I think we all know that what comes through when you deliver a message, particularly whether it's your voice or your face, if you can see the other person,
Mhm.
there's a lot being conveyed other than just the words.
Mhm. Oh, yes. And I've even noted to my coworkers, I'm like, if I'm trying to talk to somebody, and I like fully recognize the irony of me saying this on video, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Okay.
When I'm talking to somebody and I'm trying to work through a problem with them, or trying to like solve a miscommunication, or even just like normal communications, I've even found it easier now, particularly now that everybody has transitioned to virtual, to not have video on,
Mm,
because then I can just focus on what they're saying. I can focus on
hmm.
like intonation. I can focus on, is their video frozen? Have they like awkwardly stopped with their mouth open, which all of us have had happen at like
Yeah.
the most inopportune moments, I'm
Yes.
sure,
The
in the
screen
last
is
year or so.
frozen, and it's like, oh, I wish it wasn't right then that it got frozen.
And then every now and then it's like they're not frozen, they're just thinking and very still, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, you're not frozen." Like, I could have avoided that by not looking at the screen when I'm talking to you. Something that I've started doing, and this is something that I took from my days teaching, is if I'm talking to somebody and I feel like they aren't like either aren't understanding what I'm saying, I wanna make sure they understand what I'm saying. I make I have them repeat back to me what I said, but I make them use different
Mm,
words other than just like repeating the same thing back to me. And I do this when I'm talking to other people. They're explaining something to me, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to explain back to you what I just heard, but I'm not going to use the exact same words that you used. I'm going to use different words. I'm going to phrase this differently. And I want to make sure the intention is the same. And taking that extra minute to do that has made a really big difference in terms of making sure that we're all on the same page.
yeah, I think that's a really great tip, especially um, if we're setting any kind of expectations. It allows us to make sure that uh, the person that we're talking to understands the expectations the same way that I understand them, or vice
Mhm.
versa. And just rephrasing things, tell me in your own words, that kind of thing, it absolutely makes that smooth sailing. And if it's not clear, right, then we can have a moment to clarify things. You mentioned that you just went on a retreat, a work
Mhm.
retreat. So
Yeah.
obviously things have been kind of crazy now. Are you working from home mostly, or are you working in the office?
I work from home almost every single day. I had already, even in the pre-COVID days, was working from home on like once or twice a week, or if I had an
Mhm.
appointment in the city, I would work from home so I didn't have to like drive down and mess my whole day
Right.
up. And one of the things that I've realized since COVID started, and I already kind of knew this about myself, but I definitely learned it a lot more once COVID started, is that I am an introvert. I am talkative, friendly. I love people. I like talking to people, but I really need my own time home alone to recharge. And if I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of other people all day, even if we're all working on different things, that takes a lot of my energy that I actually need to be able to do the thing that I do, which is talking to landowners, talking to my coworkers, getting those messages across and influencing them. And so I have been working remotely since COVID started, and I work from home, as you can see from the background behind me. Um, this probably could be a better arranged workspace, but it also doubles as my sewing room and all of those things. And I love working from home. I really love working remotely. And most of the people who I work with actually aren't in Canada, they're in the United States. So it doesn't really matter as much that I'm not down in the US or in the office in Canada, because, everybody else is on video too.
Right. Yeah, I think that's interesting that so many people have learned things about themselves with this experience. For people that have been able to continue working but work from home, work remotely, which certainly in our industry is very common. I think some people have learned, like you, I love being at home. Please don't ever make me work in an office again. Some
Hmm.
people are like, I miss an office some days, but I like working from home. And some
Hmm.
people are just like, I'm going to go crazy if I have to work from home. Like, please let me get back into the office. But I don't think anyone really had an opportunity very often to think about what their preference was in the
Hmm.
past. And now a lot of us have figured out, okay, well, this is my preference, and that can help align me, whether it's within my current organization or maybe the next opportunity that I might be looking at. Does it offer really the work location that I'm
Hmm.
looking for?
And flexibility too. I went home to Maine to visit my family in September for the first time in since Christmas 2019, and I was able to work remotely for a week. And so I worked from my parents' back porch, where I heard sightseeing planes overhead, the neighborhood ducks quacking up a storm, and fishing boats out doing their thing in the ocean. And I was able to do that because I have the ability to work wherever I have an internet connection. And it was just so nice to be able to do that.
Yeah. Oh, so my assumption is you weren't able to get across the border for a long time being in Canada.
For a long time, I wasn't. And I had originally, there was an assumption that I had made about my ability to cross into the US. I'm an American citizen. And for a long time, I thought it was just that, like, I couldn't cross into the US, and then I found out that, like, oh wait, I was totally wrong. As a US citizen, they actually can't keep me out of the country. And
Okay.
then it was, okay, what do I need to get back into? Like, what do I need to go back the other way? And finally figured out that as a US citizen, I can cross into the US no matter what. And in Canada, then once they changed the rules on it, as long as I was fully vaccinated and got a negative COVID test, I could then enter back into Canada without having to isolate. And so I was able to go do a few more logistics involved than usual in terms of,
Yeah.
going off island for that COVID test and all that type of stuff. But it was really, really nice to be able to go home and see my family, and see the community that helped to get me where I am today. And that really is when I say my north star is helping people, it's because of my home community that is my north star, and the lessons that they helped me learn. So I really credit the people in my hometown for helping me with that being what my goal is in life, in terms of helping other people. So being able to go ground myself in that again was just absolutely glorious in so many ways.
I love that. I love that. And I think that is really just the perfect place for us to end our conversation, because I really do think that that's just a wonderful note to end on. So Emily, thank you so much for joining me on Next in Queue.